I loved the original Slime Rancher. I always struggled to get into those sort of like Stardew Valley style games. Those sort of farm games where you just sort of tend to your land to no real end. But Slime Rancher was one of the few games that actually got me invested. Cause Stardew Valley seems like a pretty cool game, but I'm not the sort of person who's into fishing minigames and romancing my local librarian or whatever. Slime Rancher managed to be the one game of its genre that actually kept me invested the entire time. The combination of the cool exploration with the nice art style, cool music, simple gameplay mechanics, and the fact that the creatures I'm farming just look absolutely hilarious. Oh dear god. All of that kept me caring about the game all the way until the very, very end. I mean, I don't know what they fill these carrots with, but this guy is clearly feeling an ecstasy that I have never felt and will never feel in my entire life. Slime Rancher is a great game, but it doesn't exactly scream, I need a sequel, does it? It's pretty cut and dry. The game gets tied up in a neat little bow by the end. There's nothing really suggesting that there needs to be a continuation. So when Slime Rancher 2 was announced, I was excited, but I was also a bit concerned. It had the potential to be on the soulless cash grab side of the spectrum, where they're just trying to milk the popularity of a game by remaking the exact same thing with a new coat of paint. And when the game finally came out on Steam, it was an early access release. Can you hear alarm bells? Nah, me neither. But surprisingly, Slime Rancher 2, at least so far, seems to be shaping up to be a pretty nice sequel to the original game. Oh my god, it happened again. Oh, and this video has spoilers for Slime Rancher 2. Obviously. The biggest thing that people will notice right off the bat is the visuals. The game is significantly more visually impressive, to the point where my game was actually getting frame drops on occasion from my PC not being able to handle it. These teleporters that take you from one island to the other were making my game have a bit of a heart attack. And killing tar slimes while close up would do the same thing. Although this does seem like it could possibly be an optimization issue though. Because sure, there's a lot of particle effects upon killing a tar slime, but it's not like it's that crazy. And it's not like it's an effect that couldn't be achieved with less particles. But I'm not actually a game dev, I'm just a guy with opinions on the internet, so I don't actually know. But the game's stunning. The cute art style that the original game had has been given the RTX on treatment, and it's great. This definitely makes it less accessible to people with lower end systems though. But for people who can run the game, the new visuals are great, and it never ends up being distracting from the game itself. It never encroaches on the art style. The world you find yourself in feels a lot bigger than in the original. There's more to explore because it's less linear. The world probably isn't actually that much bigger than in the original game, but it has a lot more verticality to it, and it has more diverging paths to take. There's more caves and like nooks and crannies and stuff to find secrets in. There's a whole lot more places to go because there's a whole lot more freedom in where you're actually able to access. The first game does have some janky spots that you can jetpack up to in a clearly unintended way, but there's nothing to actually reward you for doing that. But the sequel rewards this behavior with shortcuts to other areas and with more resources and secrets to find. And this is all great. It keeps me way more invested for a whole lot longer because I've got more to explore. But the downside to this is that I got really lost like all the time. Maybe this is just a me problem, but in the original Slime Rancher, I don't think I ever looked at my map a single time, because it was relatively easy to remember the routes you took to get to places and how to get back to your ranch and stuff. But in Slime Rancher 2, it feels like a lot of the landscapes look exactly the same. There's like a couple of unique biomes, but whilst you're inside that biome, it's impossible to tell where you are, because everything looks identical to everything else. So I found myself constantly peeking at my map to try and figure out where the hell I was and where the hell I needed to go. But I get a funny feeling that the devs caught this in playtesting, because you can actually see key landmarks off in the distance, a feature that was practically never present in the first game. Your ranch is a tall conservatory that you can actually see from really far away. Key landmarks in each island stand out upon the horizon, even when you're not on the island that they're present on. And these landmarks are highly elevated so that you can see them above the hills and the trees. It gives you a bit of extra help on figuring out where to actually go. And maybe that would be enough for most players, but personally, I was lost. Like, all the time. Even at the very, very end of my playthrough, I was still having to peek at my map every now and then just to make sure I was going in the right direction. There's also a story in Slime Rancher. Kind of. I mean, the first game had these little story nodes, and the second game has a similar thing. But these little drones' text logs are very cryptically written, and it's not even said who they're written by. I assume this is an early access problem, and that the story will get finished as the game gets finished, but at the moment, it feels a little bit odd. The intro cutscene is literally like, there's a boat, the boat had a note, and B gets on the boat because she has no regard for her own safety or well-being whatsoever and is a bit stupid. And then she arrives on an island, and that's basically the entire story so far, but quite frankly, this didn't actually detract from my experience. Because I don't know about you, but I'm not playing Slime Rancher for its story. There was a story in the first game too. Is that story good? I have no idea, I couldn't tell you. If you asked me to recall a single thing about the story in Slime Rancher 1, I couldn't do it. There's like text logs from an old person, and there's like lesbians or something, but I have no idea what the story is. I was playing Slime Rancher because of the part where I ranched the slimes. The story was entirely secondary, and I personally completely ignored it. But if a continuation of the story of the first game is something that you're personally looking for, Slime Rancher 2 will be a disappointment, at least in its early access phase. The story starts off very cryptic with these little text logs, and since the game isn't finished, it never leaves that cryptic phase. So the story as it stands right now is very lackluster. But finally onto the part that we all actually care about is the core gameplay mechanics. You know, the slimes and the progression and the resources and all that good stuff. The actual ranching part is as good as ever. It functions exactly the same to how it did in the original game, because if it isn't broke, don't fix it. But there were some key gameplay changes that I think were actually extremely welcome. In both games, there are resources that you can use to craft things. In Slime Rancher 1, you have to create these placeable objects that would passively generate these resources, which was fine, I guess, but it was a very slow-paced and tedious way to actually acquire these items. It didn't really interact with the cool exploration side of the game, or the calm, relaxing ranching part of the game either. You sort of just plopped the drills where they needed to go and forgot about them. But Slime Rancher 2 made an incredible change to this. Instead of requiring some placeable object, you instead craft a vac pack upgrade that lets you just pick the resources up directly out of the world. So instead of being a slow and passive thing that's not particularly engaging, resource gathering is now directly linked with the exploration part of the game, which I think is a great decision. It becomes an engaging part of the gameplay loop instead of being something secondary. Now there's of course the new slimes. New slimes are great because they're like funny to look at or whatever, but most of the time slimes are just reskins of each other. Like for all intents and purposes, these three slimes are exactly the same as each other. Making new slimes for a sequel falls into the risk of just making a bunch of reskins that aren't particularly exciting other than that they look funny. But they avoided this trap relatively well. The bat and angler slimes may as well just be reskins. Same with the bunny slime. They're hilarious, but so are all the other slimes. They're not particularly unique outside of their visuals. But the flutter and ringtail slimes are a fantastic addition. Flutter slimes can only be fed this rare food called nectar. So if you want their favourite food, or you want to actually progress through the game, you have to figure out how this unique food type spawns, because you can't grow it yourself. So the nectar becomes some sort of a puzzle piece that you have to solve to get through this one progression point. This might seem trivial, but it makes this one slime unique from the rest in something other than its visuals, which is great. The best slime edition is ringtail slimes. They're basically pink slimes. They eat anything and they don't have any particularly unique attributes. But their trick is that when it turns daytime, they turn into stone. So when you first encounter them, you just see these little statues and think, oh cool, there's like a decoration I can bring back to my house. But suddenly when it turns nighttime, you see them all poof into existence and start to move. They do this at your ranch as well, so you have to actually feed them at nighttime. If you forget to get around to it, then you just don't get their claws. The biggest issue with Slime Rancher 2 so far is that early access tag, because the game is only about 6 or 7 hours of gameplay so far, which is dwarfed by the original game. Of course there will be more content added as time goes on, but right now it feels pretty hard to recommend to people. If you were a massive fan of the original, then it's definitely worth it, but if you're willing to wait for a full release, then that's definitely the best move to make. Quite frankly, I wish I waited for the full release, because I want to play more Slime Rancher, but I've beat everything there is in the early access version. There are some very small bugs. I found that my screen would occasionally just flicker black for 1 frame for seemingly no reason. Also, the lighting slightly shits its pants every time you go from inside a cave or a building to outside. These are very minor bugs, but are again caused by that early access release. The game isn't shoddily made, or insanely buggy, or anything like that. It just isn't finished. The content that will come in the future just isn't here yet. For fans of the original game, that is the one and only turn off. But it's a reasonable thing to be turned off by. So if you're a super fan, you can buy the game right now. But if you're willing to wait a while, then that's probably the way to go. Thanks for watching.